Hello, everybody. One of the first things I wanted to know, because I've got a terrible memory, is do you actually remember when we first met at uni? Because you were doing maths, I was doing social sciences, but we sort of became buddies in my first year.
Yes. Now, hang on. I also have a really, really bad memory. So, damn it. Maybe you've got a better, or who knows? Like, we'll find out who has the worst memory. But the first meeting, no, I remember we lived in that house in Pearson Park. Do you remember?
Oh, the big, beautiful one.
Beautiful. I don't know if Philip Larkin lived there, but it felt like he should have done. He probably didn't.
Well,
But we were upstairs.
Let's tell the story that he did, because it's a good story.
It's a great story, isn't it? Well, so you lived downstairs in a flat, and I lived upstairs with some people. And that was an amazing thing, because we were on the top floor. I don't know if you ever came up with this. We found there's a little cubby hole in the ceiling, and you could climb through, and there was a hidden stairway, and you could get out onto the roof of this sort of old Victorian house. And this mate and I, who I lived with, we used to go up there and smoke jazz cigarettes, as they used to call it. Was that what they used to call it in the old days? But we used to smoke. We used to go up there and smoke, and it was great because there was someone in the park who, I don't know who it was, but they used to climb trees at night when it was dark, because Pearson Park is this big. For people who are watching, it was Sally and I lived on a house. It was this huge house and this beautiful park that was full of leafy trees, and someone used to climb these trees in front of our house and sing like a choir boy. So I guess they were a student that used to be a choir boy or had a very high voice. And so we'd be up there on the roof, this mate and I, up on the roof, sort of smoking away, and you'd hear this ethereal sort of singing coming around.
I remember that.
Oh, that was crazy. That was great.
It was a magic place to live, though, wasn't it? Really?
It was. Do you know, it was an amazing time. Like just before we started recording, we were talking about it. It was an amazing time. It was I suppose everyone's university years are amazing times, but it definitely worked for us.
Well, yours were, because by way of intro, so you was it before Pearson Park? You lived in Grafton Street, or was it after? Or did you?
I think it was after. No, it was before. I think it was before Pearson Park. Pearson Park, yeah.
So Grafton Street was a kind of typical northern terrace, rather down at heel studenty type street.
Yes.
And you was doing maths, and then I want to ask you about how this all came about. But then you became a pop star.
Well,
before I'm just going to do the whole kind of intro
do it.
thing, because just to set the context, because I think it's really interesting for people in terms of how do you make so many career changes, and how do you have a life that's seemingly as full of joy as yours has been, and enjoyed all these different jobs. So pop star, health food shop owner, children's author, broadcaster, children's music and lyric writer, traveller, doing creative workshops for children around the world. I mean, that's at least 5 or possibly 6.
Well, I'm very impressed. I was mentally ticking boxes. I was trying to work out if you've missed anything, but no, that's very impressive.
I'm like Mariella Frostrup. I do my homework on my guests, you see.
Oh, you're very good. That's very good.
So yeah, give us a bit of a lowdown, Stan, about, how did you go from music studying / busker in your spare time to getting into the Housemartins, and what was all that like?
It was rather pleasant, to be honest. It says, I started off doing maths at college because I had a sort of plan B that I could be a maths teacher if I ever grew up. And I lived on Grafton Street, as you said earlier, and Paul lived on Grafton Street. And it's true, he had a sign in his window as I walked past, because we both, as you said, it was a hideous place. Our house was condemned, so the gas was cut off. So we didn't have to pay rent for most of the year, because the landlord wouldn't come around and get it.
I knew that.
And there were, yeah, exactly, vile. But there were rats everywhere. I used to live, again, I lived on the top floor, so there were rats in the ground floor. And where I lived, there were mice on the top floor. And Paul lived a few doors along, and he put a sign up saying, anyone interested in busking, basically. And again, I was skint, weren't we all? And so we started busking literally to make money. It literally was just a money-making exercise. And but it turned out we decided we didn't want to do other people's songs. We wanted to write our own songs, because I decided years ago, and so Paul, that we just wanted to write our own songs. So we had our own songs, and we then said, well, let's, write. We didn't want to do each other so much. We said, well, why don't we do them together? So we sort of started writing together and busking. And I finished my degree very, very bad. I got a really bad degree. I got pass. I only just passed because we were doing gigs in my final year. Because I thought, I don't really want, being a maths teacher is all well and good. I've got no problem with that. My parents were teachers. But I thought if I could be a pop star or a musician, that would be a little bit more fun. So that's what I did. So I sort of committed my third year of degree. I sort of said, sorry, I'll try and be a musician rather than a mathematician. And that's why. So when I finished, and my parents came up to see me graduate, I had to say, look, I haven't really graduated so much as sort of scraped on through. And so they were a bit disgruntled. And I said, look, give me a year just to muck around. And if I can make it as a musician, I will. And if I can't, I'll get a proper job, honest Injun sort of thing, I'll do it. And so there you go. So it was, again, I don't know if this works in your strengths thing. So I accidentally give myself a timetable really there. And so that's what it was. I sort of, we were very lucky that Paul was extremely talented and I had a little bit myself. And I just kept on beavering away. And so whenever, we just, it's like any business, you start, my whole life has always been try and find something I enjoy doing and then try and get paid for it. And then it becomes, there's some quote, was it Churchill or someone who said, as long as you enjoy your work, you'll never enjoy what you get paid for. You'll never do a day's work in your life, or some quote like that. It was either Churchill, it's always Churchill, Mark Twain, or Oscar Wilde. One of them said those things. And so that's what I did. And it worked out. With hindsight, I realized it was far more, we were far luckier than I realized. At the time, I just thought, well, obviously you work hard, this is what happens. But I know we've talked about it. There was a strange time in the 80s. There wasn't much work. Life was in, politically, the country was in quite a state of flux. Not, I don't think as much as now, I'd say looking back, but at the time it felt like the edge of a civil war. I mean, it didn't turn out that way, but that's kind of how it felt. And so we were sort of gathered up in that. It was a very interesting time.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because, I remember me and my friend Alison going to see you play in, I'm pretty sure it was the back room of the old Hull Truck Theatre, which was quite crummy.
Spring Street Theatre.
Spring Street Theatre,
that's what it's called. Yeah, and that's where Hull Truck were, yeah.
That's where they were. And there might have been just us two other, maybe that's me embellishing it, but there were not many people in the audience. And then the next thing I remember was I'd left uni, I got my first car, I was driving my car, and suddenly I heard John Peel talk about the Housemartins. I went, oh my God, what's going on? So it felt from the outside as though it was very sudden. I mean, was it quite sudden?
Again, looking back, obviously at the time it didn't feel that way, but at the time, I guess looking back, yes, it was very sudden. But it was one of those things. Again, I suppose it comes back to your, which I don't know enough about, your idea of strengths and working, sort of taking a view of your life. And so when you saw us at Spring Street, I suspect we were a two-piece. Is that correct? It was just Paul and I. So what it was, we used to busk, and there were two of us, and it was great. We were, we did rather well. We made, at the time, it seemed like a lot of money. And we thought, well, this is great. But we sort of sat it down and thought, well, we could do this. If we're on the dole, we can do this for pocket money. It's very nice, but we could never make it a job. And we both wanted to be professional musicians. We're not pop stars, just musicians. And so we literally, again, had this sort of plan. So I'd already said to my parents, I'll do it for a year. And so Paul and I chatted, and Paul was, we said, the next thing we need to do is become a four-piece. And I said, well, obviously that'd be really hard to share the money four ways, not two. But we sort of made a commitment, so we'll do it. Again, I keep on stressing it, but we had no money. We were utterly skint, both of us. And so what we did was, there was a band in Hull called the Gargoyles, and we felt one of the better bands, far better than us. And I went and basically tried to poach the rhythm section, which was Ted and Hugh. Hugh the drummer, Ted was the guitarist in their band, but we wanted a bassist. And I basically went to them and said, look, would you come and play with our band? And they were like, no, we're in a very good band. We don't want to play with you. You're idiots. So I said, well, okay, we'll pay you. We'll pay you to rehearse. We'll pay you for gigs. Not a lot, but you'll actually be professionals. And again, it was a commitment. I didn't have the money, and nor did Paul. So I basically, it was like, in some ways, I find, I'm not suggesting this has always worked out, but if you kind of dive in and make a commitment to yourself and others, and I'm a person who very much likes to honour promises and commitments, it sort of forced my hand. So when I went back to Spring Street, rather than saying, oh, we can just busk in the bar for you, it's like, well, we can do gigs for you, so you have to now pay us rather than just giving us, say, free drinks or whatever. Not a lot, but enough to cover the wages that I've promised to these two. And so with hindsight, that was a really good thing to do, because I realized that a lot of my friends, because a lot of people of my age, obviously, as you do, you all want to be pop stars. they saw it more as the thing, I want to be famous, I want to be rich. Whereas I always saw it very much as it was almost like I want to run a shop. You know, I want it to work. I want it to work financially, so we can do this as our jobs. I don't really care about being famous or overly rich. I just want enough money that we can come off the dole and stop worried about being seen by the dole people and, you know, sued for. So I sort of, all Paul and I both wanted was just a living wage from doing music. And so weirdly, that sort of that what's the word, informed all my actions. So again, once there's four of us and we got gigs, I thought, right, well, gigs aren't enough. We need to start selling tapes. Again, for various, it was good because it made money, but it also got the name out there. And John Peel, and that was how John Peel heard of us. I think someone had bought a tape at the gig and sent it to him, or somehow given it to him. And then they did the same. Billy Bragg got given a tape by someone who'd bought it from us or seen us. And again, I know I'm going on about this too much, but I saved up my life savings at one point, went into getting a phone connected to my flat and buying an answer phone, which in those days was a lot of money, all that stuff. And it meant that when Billy Bragg called once and I wasn't there, he called and said, "All right, Stan," you know, because I put my number on all the demos. He said, "Stan, you know, I really like the tape." Someone had given it to him. And so I got to ring him and speak to him. And he was very helpful in introducing us to a record company.
That's awesome.
And it's awesome. But again, the record company didn't want to know about us. But again, back to the commitment. So there was this deal in those days that if you had, I think it was 7 Mars bars, you got a half-price coach ticket. You know, there was little stickers on there or little things. So Paul and I would go down to London, or we'd go down to do gigs, the four of us. We would literally take our instruments on the coach. And then what you do is you use the other band's drums and amplifiers. And I would literally go and hang around outside the record company. They're called Go Discs. I would go and hang around outside and knock on the door and try and get in. And it got to the point where and when we were on tour, I'd send them postcards saying, "Oh, we played a gig last night. It's really good. You should have come and seen it." And Andy, the guy, it was before stalking was a crime. And Andy McDonald, the guy who ran it, and his wife Juliet, he basically said, they came to see me and said, "Look, what do I have to do to get rid of you? You're a real pain in the arse." You know, by this one, of course, I was a spotty loudmouth, because I've always Mars bars, a spotty loudmouth young man. And I said, "Just come and see us at a gig, just one gig. That's all I want you to do." And he said, "Okay, you know, I'll do it on the deal that I come to the gig, I stay and watch you perform, and if I don't like it, you leave me alone." And I was like, "Okay, fine, I'll do that." So we then arranged a gig, I mean, really close to where they lived. Again, I don't want to stress the stalking side, but no, it was the office. They lived right just around the corner from their office, so I knew their office was. So literally within a quarter mile of their office, I arranged a gig in Hammersmith in an awful place where the toilet, the stage was in front of the toilet. So literally we were playing, if people wanted to go to the toilets, they just sort of walk around the drums. It was awful. And like just with you at Spring Street, it wasn't a huge audience. But luckily, in order, again, back to my obsession to pay for it, because we want to be professional, we'd actually brought our own instruments, so we had to hire a van. And to do that, we'd got some Housemartins, some fans from Hull who liked us. And we'd done a deal, said, "Look, if you pay for the petrol, or help us pay for all the petrol, you can come with us in the van and watch the gig." And so, of course, they said, "Yeah, that'd be awesome." And for us, it was awesome, because we had people along. And so there was literally only about 20 people at the gig, but 10 of them would come down with us in the van.
That's brilliant. But you're actually quite strategic then, and very determined.
I think looking back, you're right. It was with hindsight strategy, but at the time it was just determination. Exactly. If I fail, I know there's no safety net. We didn't have parents that would say, "Oh, don't worry, darling, you come and live with us." It was, if Paul or I failed, it was back to real life. Do you know what I mean? So there was no. And in some ways, I know it sounds harsh, but I think it's really good to have that. Obviously, we did have the safety net. We had unemployment benefit, or the UB40s, which I appreciate is harder to. I don't know how it works these days. But so we had that safety net, but we didn't have the safety net of, if it all goes tits up, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It was like, no, this is our chance. We have to take it.
And I like the fact that you were doing it because it was something that you loved doing. You weren't doing it because you wanted to be famous.
Yeah.
And what about the political angle of it? Because anybody that knows your work, knows the Housemartins work, knows that it was a kind of very fun, melodic, beaty vibe, but there was some real strong political messages. Do you think that was part of what helped you to get on, because it was so of its time?
Yeah, no, totally. Well, and it was again, that was a conscious decision that when you start writing songs, with pop songs, you do have to think, what am I going to write about? Do I write about girls or the countryside or which it tends, whatever it is, there tends to be a certain limited number of themes. and again, Paul and I writing songs. Paul would write all the lyrics, I should stress. So all I did was was talk. But we just thought, well, because again, we were both interested in politics. We were both absolutely fascinated. And in fact, Hugh also was a member of a thing called the Socialist Workers' Party. So Hugh, our original drummer. So he was very politically motivated. We didn't agree with each other. I'm not saying we all had identical views, but we all felt that politics was something that was very important and that should be debated and that you should be involved with. And so we thought, well, rather than write songs about, oh, baby, you're so pretty, which I would now write to my dogs every day, we thought, well, and what do we want to write about? And so Paul was the one that said, look, I want to write about this. This is what I write about. And we were like, yes, we like that. Which doesn't mean we always agreed with everything. In fact, one of the things we had in the van when we were traveling around to gigs, we'd sing on stage and you obviously use your voice. And then the vans afterwards, we'd have huge, long discussions, debates, arguments about politics, to and from the gigs. Because the point was saying, look, we need to stop talking about politics on tour because we're going to lose our voices by the second week we went with the tour. Because obviously on stage it's fine, but when you're in the van, you're getting quite excited. No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. This is what we should be doing. That's what they should be doing. But also, to be fair, life seemed very simple when I was back then, didn't it? There's right and there's wrong. There's black and there's white, or whatever you want to call it. And now I'm older. I definitely there are many shades of grey.
There are, and what? Because you were saying earlier, right? You didn't do it to become famous, but I mean, what was it like to be famous? Because the way I remembered you as a mate at uni was you were kind of, fun but fairly low key, a bit geeky guy,
Oh no, Sally, no, not at all. I was very high key, and no, you're absolutely devastatingly honest. Yes, thank you.
And I say that with the greatest of affection, and it's like, wow, what was it like to suddenly be famous? I mean, was it good in those days to be famous? What were the pluses and minuses?
To be honest, I'm trying to think of the pluses. Of course, it was good because I've said this before. That it was like it's like when you walk down your street or that where you are now. If you've been there before a few times, you get to know people and they say hello. But it's like that when you're famous. If you're famous in a country. It tends to be you get recognised when we walk down the street in a sort of nice way because we weren't like a boy band. People generally weren't going to scream at us that much. It did happen a little bit weirdly, but we're not really we weren't a heartthrob band. Do you know what I mean? So we didn't get that sort of silliness. Generally, people who liked us would want to talk to us. So, but it was weird because you could literally walk down the road in any town. Like, say you're playing a gig, go out for a bun or for a coffee or whatever you're going to do, buy a paper, and people walk past. All right, Stan. You're like, what? I don't even know where I am. How do you know my name? So that was good, but I'll be honest again. I did tire it because when we got sort of more famous, it did become a little bit more unwelcome. I never really. I mean, Hugh hated it. That's why he left. He left after a year or so because he just didn't like being famous. Again, he was very low key, and he was more interested in politics than fame or pop. And he just didn't like the whole sort of. It's very shallow. Oh, it's you! I can't believe it's you. Can I have your autograph? This was before phones, say that it wasn't photographs, it was just autographs. And like, I remember, again, I used to say this when I visited schools, my last memory was of walking around a department store somewhere with I had kids by this point, little tiny kids. I was buying my oldest son, who was a tiny kid, like 3, some pants, because I think he had an accident. So I was trying to buy some pants for him. And there were these like teenage girls following us around, giggling and pointing. And I was thinking, this is no way for a grown adult to live. So I must confess, we had a thing, Paul and I, we first signed a record contract for 3 years. And we said, let's at the end of 3 years have a sort of sit down and decide what we're going to do next. And we did in Dublin, actually. We after a show, the last show of a tour, we sat down and Paul and Norman, Norman was in the band, obviously, and a guy called Dave. Paul and Norman said, yeah, we want to keep on going. We want to be pop stars, we want to be famous. And Paul wants to start a new band. And Norman wants to be a DJ. And I said, and it was very kind. Paul very kindly said, look, do you want to be in the band, the new band? And I said, that's, it's a really kind offer. I said, but that's just not for me. Pop isn't for pop. Being a pop star is not my comfortable place. Like you said, I was a low-key, geeky, bored. I've always been the most boring person I've ever met. So I said, look, I don't want to do this anymore. So that's what I stopped, basically.
So you got out on a high when you were, I'm just looking at my notes here. So you had 3 top 10 albums, 6 top 20 singles. Was it hard to make that decision to go when you were kind of peak success?
No. Hey, back to stories. Back to the stories is the again. It's funny you should say earlier about my life looking so joyous. I would say my life has been quite difficult. But there again, don't we all say that about our own lives? You know, the philosopher's bowl is where you put all your problems into a bowl, and at the end of the discussion, who would change your problems for someone else's? We've all had problems. But what happened was, at the height of the band's success, my brother died very suddenly, my older brother. And looking back, I realized that I found that quite difficult, because literally we're in the studio recording, and I got a phone call saying, your brother's dead. So the producer very kindly, who I'm still friends with now, lovely guy, put me in his car because I was a mess, and just took me home to my parents, and we sort of did what we did for a weekend of the week. And then I went back to the studio, and this is no blame on the other guys in the band, but they didn't understand. And so wouldn't have expected them to. And I didn't understand, but I think looking back, that had quite a big effect on me. It's made me sort of reevaluate my life. And you think, well, hang on, do I want people screaming at me? Do I want to be on top of the pops, or do I want to spend time with my family and the people who I may never see again? Luckily, I see my brother literally a week or two before he died. So we had a great time. So I was lucky enough to have great memories, but it was one of those, it made you realize, you think, life as we know it, I would say, wow, that turned me into the George Harrison of the Beatles type of person, where you suddenly think life as we know it. When you're young, you think it's all about, girls and glamour and money and cars and whatever it is you're into, football. And it very quickly turned me into a sort of, no, life can actually get quite serious quite quickly. And so there you go. So
that's a big trauma to have. How old were you at that point, Stan?
I was 24.
24, yeah.
But, excuse me. And it's been weird because again, part of the band, I loved all the creative stuff, but also we sort of managed ourselves. I was the kind of manager person of the band, really. We had a road manager who came with us on tour, but it was my job to negotiate contracts and everything, and employ people and let people go and things like that. So I was living in a very grown-up world, and suddenly it got quite dark for a while. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to refocus my life. And then I met my wife, who's out at the minute. But I met my wife, and she had some children, and we ended up living together and moving in. And I thought, this is what I want. I want to spend, I want a family. I want something, I don't know, something you can hold on to, basically, that isn't ephemeral, doesn't depend on fashion or someone else, or my ego. It's not an ego-driven thing. So I'd say that's weird. That's almost like when my interest in politics sort of skewed into an interest in philosophy, really. I would say. So there you go.
So, and what I'm really conscious in talking to you today that there are a lot of people, because of the pandemic, who are really scared, that have gone through and are going through difficult times. Many people are losing their jobs and are scared they will lose their jobs. There's a lot of people on the job market, as there were in the 80s, actually. I remember when I left uni, struggling. And one of the reasons why I thought it'd be great to talk to you is, I'm sure there are pearls of wisdom and maybe a bit of a few thoughts and advice you can pass on. So I just wondered, at that point in your life, you left a really successful, buzzing career that you were good at. Do you remember what you were thinking about and what ideas you had in your head about what you might do next?
Again, interesting. Again, I hadn't really thought about this until you just said that it was, I had no idea what I was going to do next. Again, I had very little money, weirdly, because for various reasons, we'd chosen not to sort of make ourselves rich, basically, by other things. So I didn't have much cash. So I moved down to Bristol from Hull, because my brother, my other brother was living down here at the time. So I moved to be close to him so we could be close together. He came to live with us for a while. So that sort of took up all my cash, because the houses in Bristol were a bit more expensive than Hull. So I bought this tiny little house in Bristol, and I had no cash. And again, it came back out, the story of my life. Isn't that awful? Because I tried to do the decent thing by all the people we employed. So I thought, just because I don't want to do this anymore doesn't mean that everyone else should lose their jobs. So I organised it so that everyone else was okay. But then, of course, it meant that when I looked in my own purse, we weren't. So I didn't have any idea what I was going to do. But so we bought this place, a house in Bristol. And then I bought a shop off a friend, a Whole Foods. That's how I became a Whole Foods shop owner. It was a friend was getting rid of it. It was cheap. And he said, you can have it, basically. So I bought it off him. And again, it was just that determination. I thought, I now have a family. By this time I had a family. I had 4 children, a wife and 4 children. And I said, I'll run a shop. I'll start a shop. Just because I thought, well, I don't know what I want to do, but this, at least that will bring in instant, we can afford to live. And also it was whole food so we could eat. I said, we'll never starve. So there you go. So it wasn't really a thought through thing. It was literally, again, I know it sounds weird, but I'm a big believer in necessity. I'm not a believer in being horrible to people. There should be a safety net in life. I absolutely agree with that. But I think it's nice to let people have the freedom to try and aspire for themselves, if you know what I mean. I don't want to sound like some blooming card carrying, Tory on that. I'm not at all. But I'm just saying it's good. You need the welfare state. You need a safety net for many of the obvious reasons. But people need to be allowed to fail themselves so they can learn how hard that is and how bitter that feels. And the shop duly failed. It was not great.
Did you do the shop out of necessity?
Yeah, totally. Having the shop, again, just like that, again, I suppose it was an artificial deadline. I thought, I'll get a shop, I'll run a shop. And I'd read about George Orwell. George Orwell, obviously we all know George Orwell, not his real name. I forget his real name. But anyway, not his real name. But he had for a while run a post office somewhere. Because, he was born in India. His dad was an Indian civil servant, a British civil servant in India. And so he'd come to this country and run a post office. So I thought, hey, I won't run a post office, but I'll run a whole food shop. And that'll give me time to write, either in the shop or in the evenings, I can write kids' stories. So that's one, if I'm honest, it was a romantic idea, the shop. But it actually, of course, as I said, it was much harder than I realised, and it didn't do well. It was fine. It lasted a couple of years. And then life moved on, and the business got taken over.
And you started publishing your children's books by that point.
Yes. What happened was, again, I was lucky enough to, again, back to you, but again, this is in your books, always, you said use strategies. And I thought, I want to be a writer. I write stories for kids. How on earth do you get them published? And I had been at school with a guy called Steve Lodge, whose dad still is a famous novelist called David Lodge. So I used to stay in the house all the time. So I literally rang up my mate Steve and said, Steve, can I talk to your dad? When I was about 25, 26 at this point. And so he was like, yeah, go on then. So I just spoke to him literally on the phone. I said, look, explain the situation. I said, what do I do? And it didn't again, just like the band, it didn't take much. He just said, you should probably get an agent. That's the first step. And so again, just like with the record companies, I just then, started sending stuff off to agents. And just like the record companies, most of them ignore it or throw it away. And I forget the story how it is, but finally I met an agent who said, you know what, I'll take a chance, because he said, actually, I think being a pop star won't be that helpful. This was the days before celebrity authors, everyone now writes kids' books. But in those days, serious authors wrote kids' books or whatever, kids' authors. So I'm not sure it'll help you all, because of course people who like the band won't have children yet. So, and people who don't know the band won't care. And older people will think the last thing I want is my child reading a book by a pop star, Ugh, hideous, what a vile idea. So she said, I'm not sure it'll help you very much, but there you go. So I got an agent, I got published, and I think I wrote about 120, 130 books.
So you're obviously, I've never read any of your kids' books, I must admit, but you're obviously good.
I don't know if they were good, but they sold.
How many copies have you sold, do you know? No,
I don't. That's a really good question. I always stick at how many I've done, and I don't even know how many languages. They've been, for a while, I've got them on a shelf in the corner. Every time they translate, again, I used to say it when I visited schools to talk to children about writing. So every time you write a book, you used to get given, usually it was about 6 free copies. So I'd give them away to my kids or other people's kids, and I'd keep one. So I've got one on the shelf. And every time they're translated into a different language, you get a copy or 6 copies of the book. And so I know it's translated in quite a lot of languages, including, all of them, which was very useful later on in life, which we'll come to later on when I traveled the world as a creative writer person. But so they're translated into a lot of languages, or not a lot, but a few. And they seem to sell quite well. So yes, it certainly did well. It was one of the things, again, it was back to what I said, determination. I sort of did one thing and thought, I want to do this. But then I realized it was great. And I think for a while, again, back to my maths, I was doing my own negotiation and stuff. And it's like, I worked out that I was in the top 5% of earners, of kids authors, earners in the country. But then I looked at the amount of money I was receiving and thought, that I can't really afford to raise 4 children on this money. And so it made me realize that actually writing kids' books, it's like everything in life. It's that pyramid. There's 1 million people at the bottom earning nothing, and there's 6 people at the top earning £1 million each. That's the way life works, hierarchies. And I was somewhere, not at the top, but there-ish, but still not earning enough to sort of, pay the bills.
So what strategy did you come up with next then to earn more money?
Well, exactly like this. I literally remember once sitting down with my wife and I, when you do, you sort of look at the bill, think, oh dear. She said, basically, we need to double our income. And so she by this point, she was training. She became a nurse. She was a pediatric nurse, which was very. And in those days, again, back to the good old comfort. What's the word? Safety net. You got a bursary when you're training to be a nurse, so which is absolutely brilliant and a really good idea. And I think they may have brought it back. I hope. But it meant that we could afford for her to train and then become a nurse, which is something she wanted to do. She obviously loved working with children. She loved the job. So I said, well, look, I need to do my shit. I need to pull my weight. So I looked around and thought, right, and doing the kids' books, I'd done loads of conferences and stuff. You meet people. And I realised that kids' telly was the next thing. And so because I'm in Bristol, I started off by approaching the Natural History Unit, the NHU, which is the Dave Attenborough thing, where all his films are made. And I never worked for him or with him, but I started to get gigs writing wildlife scripts, because weirdly a lot of shows were aimed at kids. There were kids shows, but wildlife, and it's like in that sense, my skill set really helped, because it's again always back to, I'm sure it's your strengths book. You've got to work on your skill set, but how can I tweak it? Yeah. So being a pop star, and I'll say this to kids when I do my creative writing, say, look, writing stories and songs and poems and scripts, it's actually the same process, just like you said at the beginning. It's all about stories. It's all about a story, beginning, a middle, and end. And same is true with songs, stories, or scripts. So someone very kindly took a chance, and I got, for a few years, I wrote scripts for kids' telly doing wildlife shows. And it's great, because the weird thing, back to you about the memory, is that before the show is put together, you get sent all this footage of animals doing things. And so in my head, I kind of think, yeah, I've seen polar bears swimming. I've seen, brown bears eating salmon. I've seen, eagles flying. No, I haven't, not in real life. But I've watched hours of footage, because you have to go through the footage and work out what story you can tell. Because even wildlife shows, again, sadly, I haven't worked in telly, even like the news, everything is scripted. Nothing is, very few things in life are factual, because facts they're not black and white. Most facts, apart from mathematical ones, are actually quite difficult and tricky to put across. So you have to sort of choose how you're going to present them and what you're going to include and what you're going to leave out, because it would make it too complicated. And so the wildlife scripts, that's what you do. You give them all this footage, and how can we pull together a 40-minute show that has a narrative arc, or does this or does that. Very good training for me. So it meant I'd gone from writing kids shows to kids scripts. And then I thought it was great doing wildlife. But again, it was limiting. There was only so much of it. So I thought what I need to do is just do kids and now I can write for children's TV. Again, I know now if I go for a meeting, if I walk in, it was great, because I worked out, if I say I used to be in a band called the Housemartins, that generally gets me a meeting, but it doesn't get me any work, because people say, well, exactly, well, who cares? These kids watching wildlife shows don't care that you were famous 10 years ago. They're not interested. But I can say, so I've got the meeting and say, but I've also written kids books. And then they go, oh, you've written kids books, you can write wildlife scripts. So then when I went to see people to write animation, cartoons for kids, again, I walk in, hi, I used to be a pop star. Oh, that's interesting. But why are you talking to me? And I say, well, because you run a TV channel, and I've written kids' books, I've written wildlife scripts, and I now want to write animation scripts. And so for quite a few years, I had a really wonderful career as a sort of, I don't know what I used to call it, the golden-haired boy when I had hair, the black-haired boy of cartoons. So it was great. I was lucky enough to work with a lot of great people on a lot of great shows, writing shows, developing shows, producing shows, directing shows, and casting. And also because I'd worked with kids, because I had kids of my own. I said, I can work with kids, I've got kids of my own. And so I often would find myself writing the show, casting the kids, and then directing the kids in the show. And then it was great, because the DBS stuff came out, and it's all fine. You get the big ticks, and it's fine. So I spent a long time doing that, working with kids in studios, because it's actually really hard. It sounds awful. Never worked with children and animals. So true. I've done both, and they're
We've put them together.
But oh God, no. And so with kids, it's actually surprisingly hard to get a child to look natural on camera. So my job was to get a whole bunch of kids and make them look natural, on like they're doing what they're supposed to do. So that was a great.
When I'm listening to you talking, one of the things that strikes me is that comes up quite a lot in my conversations with people is that often women will look at a potential opportunity and go, oh, I could never do that. Whereas men will often go, well, I haven't done it before, but I'm going to try that. I mean, do you think of yourself in the latter category? Because what I'm interested in is you've you've put yourself in front of people in, it sounds like, quite a confident and brave way to get new opportunities for yourself without having had experience in those things. What advice would you give to people that are in a similar situation where they think I've got something to contribute to that, but I've never done it before and I'm shy, or I'm not sure if I can?
Well, firstly, to go back to the point, I absolutely agree with you. I think it's again, back to my maths and stuff. It's the bell curve, isn't it? Is that you know, some people are shy, some people are loud and brash, and most people are in the middle. And with men and women, you tend, on average, I suspect, to get more men who are more brash. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't mean women aren't. There are some women who are far more brash than I. I'm not saying all women are timid. I'm sure you aren't either. I'm saying I think you're right. It tends to be a thing, having seen from my own daughters and wife and friends and everything. But you know, so I've tie myself up in trying to be politically correct. But I know what you mean is what I'm saying. I get it, that I think a lot of times, for whatever reason, there is a sort of gender difference there. But so myself, but I've also, and I wonder if this is related to, again, my wife worked throughout our marriage until she retired. She's worked. So I knew she was doing her part, but she also had to do the sort of lion's share of the child care. So she could only work part-time. She couldn't work full-time. So it's always, again, that thing of, if I go in, and again, it's quite simple again, because it was like, if I don't bring home the bacon, there will be no bacon, because my wife can do what she can do, but she also has to do the home stuff, which doesn't get paid, but is equally as important.
So are you saying that you were shy at times and worried about going into these meetings and putting yourself forward, but you did it anyway?
Oh, no, absolutely. No, absolutely. It's funny because when you said earlier, again, I hate being the 4 Yorkshiremen. Oh, I had it tough, Sally. Didn't we have it tough? But when you said, oh, your life has been so filled with joy, I thought, well, again, weirdly, I was chatting to a friend last week and we were laughing, sort of scoring our lives out of 10 for how shit they've been. And I was saying, I'd give myself a solid 7.5 for things of, you know, death, divorce, disease, disaster. I've known and loved them all. And I think it's again, back to why does philosophy interest me? So I think, what I've learned in life is, for me, I'm not saying it works for everyone, but you know, you can't control the hands again, cliches, forgive me. You can't control the hands you're dealt. Things happen, some shit happens sometimes, and it's not nice. But you can control how you respond to it, how you deal with it. And often I find in life when something bad happens, it does put me it puts all of us on a back foot for a while. And some people struggle to get back on the front foot. And so I know some of my parents, again, they were amazing after my brother passed away. They bounced back really well. I mean, I said it to them at the time. I mean, my mum has a lot of faith. She's a Christian, and she had a huge amount of faith, which helped her. But she bounced back really well. But weirdly, of course, as you do in the situation, they had some friends. You kind of make friends with other people in a similar situation, and some of those friends never recovered. They never could get off the back foot. And I'm not knocking them for it. I understand life is tough. But so I'm saying, but it's a question of if you're lucky enough or able enough to sort of take the blow and get back up again. But it's like, no, because I used to say I'm whoring myself out. That's all I'm doing. I'm whoring myself out to make money to feed my kids. And again, I suppose it sounds awful like that, but it means it's not for me. I feel like I'm doing it. Obviously, you have to raise your kids. You don't want them to suffer because I'm an idiot. So I always went to the meetings thinking, this isn't about me. This is about me hopefully supporting my kids. And again, I used to say, forgive me swearing a lot. I suddenly burst into sweary Stan. But before I go into meetings, I used to think, look, remember, no one's going to die here. If I don't get the gig, I'm not going to die. It might be a bit uncomfortable for a while, but we'll survive. That's good
advice, actually. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So that's seriously, it's only kids telly. No one's going to die, whatever it is.
But also, you had something to offer. You had quite a few things to offer in terms of your storytelling ability, creativity, and all of those things. Did you feel that deep down? I've got something to bring to contribute to this work.
I think you're right. I think you have to, if you're talking about advice you give to people, I would say, because again, I talk to my kids' friends, so they're in their early 30s, and I say exactly that. You've got to kind of put on an act and act confident, but it's pointless acting confident about something you can't do. So if I said to you, hey, you're in Greece, Sally, you know what? I can speak Greece. I'll be your translator. Well, that would obviously fall flat because I don't know a single word of Greek. It's an impossible alphabet to read for me. And so you shouldn't bluster about things you can't do, is my first rule. I always move my skill set slowly. So I think exactly, if I know I can write songs and stories for kids, there's probably a chance I can write scripts. So I know I can bluster. If I've never done it before, but I think I can do it. And the other note I used to whisper to myself before I went into an office was say, look, remember, the worst thing that can happen here today is they can tell me to fuck off.
Did they ever do that?
And that's fair enough. Yeah, no, loads of times.
Oh, really?
Again, loads of people would say, yeah, they'd say, oh yeah, I want to meet you because I love the band. Can you sign an album? And I say, yeah, great, done that. Any chance of a job? They say, nah, fuck off. And I said, that's fair enough. You know, I tried it on. You didn't want to buy it. That's fair enough. And again, that's the other one, is don't take it personally, which is very easy to say, very hard to do. Yeah, don't take it personally.
Would you say then, deep down, you are a confident person that's enabled you to be resilient in these different situations?
That would be one for that. Again, back to philosophy, I'd say we're all pretty similar deep down. We just have different coping mechanisms. So you, and in some ways you could, again, weirdly, name drop alert. I was chatting to a mate of mine this morning when we were walking the dogs around the park, and he's an actor, and he was in Game of Thrones. And it's funny because he still gets gigs where people, because of his voice, they get him to record things for, I don't know what birthday, I don't know what for, but he basically gets paid to record things for people so they can play it to their friends or their phones or something. I don't know what it is for. But why did I mention that? I've lost my thread.
About confidence.
Confidence. He and I were talking about exactly that, because he was saying that. He said, it's weird. He said, he said, when I talk to them, they think I'm an actor and they kind of recognize me and they think I'm really confident. He said, but a lot of them, my mates, weirdly conversation, he was saying, a lot of my mates who are well-known actors, who are successful, said they're actually really quiet. A bit like you said about me, sort of geeky, boring nerds.
I didn't say boring, by the way.
No, but I said that about myself. Sorry, you're right. You should have done so. You've been too kind, as always. But he said actually, their coping mechanism, often with actors, and I think with pop stars, in my experience of them, is their coping mechanism is to put on this persona of, don't mess with me, I'm big and I'm famous and I'm this and I'm that. And actually, I used to say the few times I met famous people, you generally walk away thinking, wow, that is one damaged individual who is trying really, really hard to hide it from the rest of the world.
Wow. By now, I don't know, how old are you now? In your mid to late 30s when you were doing the TV, kids TV.
God, I can't remember.
Because then you went into journalism, didn't you?
Well, no. Oh goodness, no. Kids telly kept on going, and because I remember, yeah. I think maybe it was in the 30s when I started, but I was doing books as well. But I remember that there was a joke in kids telly that when you hit 40 in kids telly, you evaporate, because there was no one over the age of 40 in kids telly. But weirdly, apropos of nothing, what's weird is I've always worked for female bosses, because kids literature and telly seem to have a preponderance of female bosses, but even they used to mainly disappear. Everyone just disappears off. I don't know what happens to them. And so I kept on going. And by this time, I was with I'd had a couple of companies with people, production companies. And when I turned, as we were approaching 50, I had another mate he and I had a company together. And we actually pitched a show where we were in the show. It was only a short. It was a thing called The Bops for Nickelodeon. And it was basically just two fingers to the world. It's like, we're the oldest people in the building. Even the CEO of the company is younger than me, and we're going in there to pitch a show where we are the talent and the writers and the directors and the producers. And we got the gig. It worked. It's a long story, but it worked out. And that was our sort of swan song. So did that at 50. And thought, by that time, there was literally, we were the oldest people in the industry. So we sort of both faded away. And I forget what the question was.
Quite satisfying.
Oh, exactly right. It really was. It was a childish sort of glee. And again, you realise why people like 50 fade away, because we were too old. It was a really hot, the studio we worked in was really hot, and the makeup and the costumes were really hot. And we were both saying, we're too old for this game. And again, there's lots of little kids running around, which are lovely, but they're exhausting. And you think, I'm just too old for this. So that's when, again, back to your thing, sideways strategies. I was doing publicity for that TV show. And so it meant doing a lot of interviews with people for whatever. And there was one journalist who wanted to do an interview, and I missed it. For some reason, I couldn't do it. And I said, look, tell you what, send me the questions you're going to ask, and I'll write the answers down, and you can sort of change them to suit you. So, because don't worry, I can write. I know what I'm doing. And so they sent me the questions. I wrote the answers, and they said, this is really good. We can just use this. And I was chatting to them. I said, I always had this weird ambition to be a columnist, because I've read so many columnists over the years that I've loved and watched, in fact, just last night I was watching Caitlin Moran on telly. She was at the Cheltenham literature
Literature
festival.
Festival, yeah, it's on now.
Yeah, she wrote. I haven't seen her for years, but she used to write a column someone used to read. I used to really enjoy it. I didn't always agree. Again, I didn't always agree with her, but I thought she had a wonderful voice, great writing voice. And so I thought, I really fancy being a columnist. You know, you only have to do like 3 hours work a week. Awesome. That's my kind of job. And the kids are grown up like that. So I said to him, do you reckon your editor would let me write a column? He said, I don't know. I said, why don't you write some samples and I'll give them to him. Long story short, I started writing for the editor. And when I've been writing there about 6 months, he said, look, we should meet up. So I've been in the office. These days, you just do it from home, from this computer and send it. And never met him. And we went in.
What was the subject of the columns?
It's called The Diary of an Urban Grandad. And it was about literally, because it's a Bristol paper. I still write them now, actually. I've got to send one off today. And it was literally just me talking about life in Bristol with grandkids, me living here. And so it meant you could mention things that were happening and things we've been to see. And it was just a sort of gentle gallop through my life, but in a Bristolian sort of way. And so I met the editor for about 6 months, and I don't think he knew I was working for him until then. Because he was like,
paying you, was he?
So, well, yeah, yes, I was getting paid, but not by him, by someone else. Perhaps they'd snuck it in. Perhaps they wanted to meet me. He was like, who the hell is this person we're paying every week? And why are we paying them? Anyway, I went in to meet him, and he was at university the same time as you and I. His name's Michael Norton. He did English.
Wow. What coincidence.
And it literally, it was one of those things. He said, hang on a minute. You're in the Housemartins. God, you know, exactly. He said, I think what you did, one of those classics, I came to see you live. And so there, and we got on really well. We're really, really good mates. Really good mates now, years later. So that's how I got into journalism. And again, doing that, I've been doing that for however long. And someone said, I met again someone, I forget where, said, oh, would you like, I forget what it was, a cottage or a boat or something, like a holiday, basically, a holiday. And I said, yeah, who wouldn't? He said, and it's free. And I said, well, that sounds very nice, but altogether suspicious. And they explained, obviously, the world of PR, the way it works is they give you a freebie and you write an article about it. And that's the way it was. And so I wrote that in the column. For a while, I'd do 1 or 2 of those. And I thought, this sounds interesting. And then I was taking my son to Thailand. I said to him, well, let's go to Thailand for my younger son for 2 weeks. And I was again at a party somewhere, and I met someone, and I said, you know, chit chat. I said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm taking my son to Thailand, and I'm a columnist, and I do apologise in advance. You're going to pull a face, Sally. So I apologise."
I think I know what you're going to say. You're going to mention the name of the publication.
So, yes, exactly. I can only apologise to listeners. If anyone's listening still at this point, I'm so sorry. But the guy was a lovely guy. It turned out he was a travel editor, and he said, I'll commission you to write a story about that. And that will, you know, I can help you, give you numbers so you can get flights, you can get hotels, you can get stuff sorted out. And again, always.
Daily Mail, folks, Daily Mail.
I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say the date. No, but again, it was, I have to say, I've written for quite a few nationals. And the staff of the Daily Mail were I haven't written them for a while. But they were always lovely. They were really lovely people. And one thing, again, you learn from my experience in the media is that people who work in the media, they don't always have a choice over who they work for. You know, so this guy, he worked for the Mail. He was a lovely guy, and everyone I worked with about 3 or 4 people at the Mail. They've been fantastic, and they were lovely. And there were other publications I could mention, The Guardian, that I've read for a long time, and you'd think they were lovely people, and they were the worst people to work for. I have to say, I wouldn't want to work for them again. I'm sure they wouldn't invite me, but I really wouldn't want to repeat that experience. But the Mail have always been fantastic and very good and very professional, but not necessarily the audience I would, you know, choose if that was my choice, but it wasn't. So, but I said, what you learn in media, again, back to philosophy, is that this applies to everything I've in my experience. I'm not saying it's everyone's experience, but so all these papers, and all TV channels, they tailor the stories to fit the audience they think they have. And so the people that work there may or may not subscribe to that view. And I actually think the bigger problems arise when the people at the paper do subscribe to those views. So then they become a little bit propaganda style. And I'm afraid I would point that accusation at The Guardian and the BBC. There's definitely, having worked at both, there is definitely a culture that it's my way or the highway. Whereas at the more, I can't believe I'm saying this, But the Mail and other papers, which one would definitely have reason to be more cock an eyebrow and say, really? The people are more quietly to each other saying, yeah, I don't necessarily agree with everything that I see in print before me, but I have to pay my mortgage. So that's the deal they've made with their soul. And I'm afraid I've had to do the same thing myself. So I'm not proud.
At the moment, I think that's certainly going to be the case for a lot of people who are, I mean, I must admit, this thing about, follow your passion, find your dream job and all of that, it's just not realistic for a lot of people. But nor is, I remember when I was researching one of my books, I was talking to I was interviewing a stockbroker who'd had a massive career change. And we were talking about the sort of work that I do, helping people to find their strengths, do work that they really love, that fulfills them. And he said to me, but surely that's a middle class thing, Sally. And I said, it's not. I've worked with carers, I've worked with people in supermarkets, with prison officers, as well as with scientists and lawyers. And it's really all about that human thing about we've all got strengths, we've all got things that energize us, that bring us joy, that we're drawn to. For a carer, it's they want to help. For a prison officer, they want to solve problems, they want to contribute. So it's not a middle class thing. And this is the thing that I'm trying to put out into the world now, when there's so many people struggling with what to do for work, is to try and bring it down to what are the things that I'm naturally really good at, what am I drawn to, and where might I be able to use those things productively, even if I've got no experience in that field. And it sounds like, I know you're a pop star, you're an author, you're a lot of things that people would say, I could never be that. But actually, what you've been telling me today is that you've put some of your real interests and the things that you're good at and you can make a contribution with, you've put those to work in a number of different fields, haven't you?
Yeah, and it's really interesting what you said, because one of the again, back to when I did my which I'm sure I'll go back to when COVID disappeared slightly. When I used to go around and visit kids in schools, I used to love playing that game of put your hands up if you know what you want to do when you grow up. And of course, what's interesting actually how it changes from culture to culture. In the West, it nearly always tends to be footballer, dancer, famous, pop star, whatever. And other cultures like China or the Far East or Middle East or Southeast Asia, it's different. They want to be pilots, engineers, doctors, and I think what it comes down to exactly that is that middle class thing of, oh, you can be anything you want to be, darling. And I say, well, you know what? When I was your age, not their age, when I was sort of 16, 18, as I just said to you, I said my ambition wasn't to be a pop star. My ambition was to pay the bills so I could afford to live in my own house. Because I'm sure I could have gone back to my parents. I know they would have let me, but I really didn't want to do that. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet. And so if that means busking, if that means, I've done loads of jobs. If that means washing up, I was a washer up, I was a plongeur. If that means being a waiter, if that means being an industrial cleaner, I'll do anything to fulfill my ambition, which is to be able to afford to pay my bills and live in my own place. And I say to them, so what you do to achieve that is, for me, was secondary. And then you look at what you have to do. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are jobs I wouldn't want to do forever. But like you said, you can find a way. But I understand it's really hard. I've got so many, it's gone now, I knew so many people who wanted to be a pop star. That's it. That's all I want to be, as a pop star. So they refused to sort of compromise on that. So it just meant they had quite unfulfilling lives for sort of 10 or 20 years till they finally moved on. And I would say, if you could save the time. Just decide what your real ambition is. Because when you say I want to be a pop star, what do you mean? Do you want to sex with loads of people or make loads of money or be famous? What is it? Analyze it. Work out what you really mean. Or write songs. What is it? Because if you want to write songs, you can do that for yourself. You can put them on YouTube. What is it you really want? Just like it's exactly what you're saying about strategies. Work out what the core thing is. And for me, my core thing is I like getting on my hind legs and telling stories. That's what I like doing. And the rest has just been a bonus, really. But like you said, my main thing's been the thing I'm proudest of is that my wife and we have raised our children, and they have now gone on to have their own children, most of them. So there you go, job done.
So Do you think you were lucky enough when you became a pop star? Do you think you were lucky to know yourself quite well, and that self-knowledge kept you on your true north, if you like, throughout your life?
No, I'd say it's definitely been a journey of a journey into knowing. Like, but as again, the other cliche I love is we're all a work in progress until our final dying breath. So I'd say no, definitely a work in progress. And I'd say, in fact, no. Weirdly, it was the other way around. I would say, luckily, I was so stupid, I didn't realize you could fail at being a pop star. You know, I thought I want to be a pop star. I'm going to work hard. I've seen other people want to be a pop star, but I've seen what they've done is you know, I had other mates at the same time as me. In fact, before me, would get record contracts, and then they'd get all like, ooh, and they would change, and they'd think the work was done now. And I think, well, I don't want to do that. I want to do it from the bottom up. I don't want to be a pop star, just be a pop star. I want to, as I said, be a professional musician, pay the bills, and then to do that, you've got to be good enough that hopefully, you know, blah, 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 it builds itself. Whereas what other people tend to go for is I want the top bit, the cherry on the cake. I don't want to actually cook the cake. Yeah. And that's not to knock them. I mean, it was just a choice. That's another thing traveling the world makes you realize is that in the West, all of us in this country are part of the 1% in the world. So it's point. I've stopped, you know, I've never joined them. Oh, I hate the 1%. They've got all the money. It's like, yep, because that's us. Yeah. I play a game when I go to schools. Again, you go through the list, literally. Do you have a bed to sleep in? Did you eat this morning? Do you have a toilet in your house that flushes? Do you have a door on your toilet bathroom? Because if you do, you are in the top, you know, X% of the world's population who dream of such luxuries. And of course, kids in Britain go, what? I'm not rich, I'm poor. It's like, trust me, you travel the world, you are rich, and you are incredibly privileged and lucky. And so I'm very where I am. I'm not playing the game that I had a hard life at all. I've been incredibly lucky and privileged.
So when you look back on that young man then that, you know, ended up being picked up by John Peel, ended up famous and has gone on to do these really lovely things that have brought a lot of joy to people. When you look back at that young man and now to the 50-something you are now, what would you say and this is an inevitable question from me, what would you say the strengths are that you've carried with you that have served you through your life?
I would say one of them would be definitely be careful about making promises to yourself and others. But if you make them, carry them out, keep to them, because it's again the old cliche. If something's easy, it's not worth doing. If something is hard and frustrating and feels impossible, the sense of achievement, if you do it, is incredible. And if you fail at doing it, you will learn lessons. It's always worth. Really, and as long as you fail because you tried, not because you've given up. If you fail because you've given up, you won't learn anything. But if you try really hard at something and you fail, you will gain something from that experience. You know, again, it's a school cliche that failure, you learn through failure, not success. You know, or you learn more through failure than success. So I would say, if I was talking to my young self, I'd say, mate, it's going to be quite a rocky ride. I won't give you details because it'll scare you. But yeah, buckle up and enjoy it, because life is short. We're dead a long time, and life is for the living. I would fill my bucket with cliches and scatter them all over his head.
Well, and these are but I mean, they are cliches, but what you said in this conversation, I think, are things that will help people a lot who are, you know, struggling with their 100th job application that they haven't had a reply from. And
hang on, I totally know that feeling. I've been there a lot of times, and I said I gloss over it. You gloss over it, make a funny story out of it. You know, the time I went for a meeting and someone didn't know I was coming, so I'd spent half a day traveling. And they said, "No, I'm not going to see you. Get lost." And so I spent a day traveling back to to go to a meeting that never. We've all had hundreds of those. And at the moment, I've just to finish on a thing. I'm doing with this mate Mike. In fact, yesterday, I'm doing a YouTube channel called Stan's Happy Hour. Plug. If you get a chance to plug it, please do. Well, actually, or don't. But it's an interesting thing because it's an exercise. I make little films. I go on adventures on canal boats and canal walks and things like that. And we make films, and everyone said, I put them on Facebook, and they get quite a lot of views. I think the last one got 250,000 views. The last film I put on Facebook. So I thought, you know what, we'll start a YouTube channel, and we'll be YouTube people. And of course, we put it on YouTube about 2 months ago. We started doing this, and so far we have gathered like 600 subscribers and about 3 views.
Why is that? Because it's such a simple, I mean, joyful, nothing much happens, but it's positive, isn't it?
I agree. But sorry, the point I was trying to make, apart from a shallow plug, the point I was trying to make was that it's really good because it teaches you humility. Again, that sort of thing. Oh, well, look at me. I've been not famous. I've been on telly. And on Facebook, I get loads of views. I'm never so popular. And you go on YouTube and you get nothing. No one watches. No one cares, and no one pays attention. And that's quite hard to deal with. Of course, it's not hard. It's a shallow little social media thing. But what I'm saying is, as an experience, it makes you realise that it's always worth trying to do stuff that knocks you back and makes you be reminded of that you are just a crap little person.
It's similar to this conversation when you bumped into me on Facebook a few weeks ago, and we had a very quick chat, and I said, oh, do you want to do this? And I mean, you know, I'm sitting in Greece, you're sitting in Bristol, it's recorded on Zoom, but you know, it felt like we wanted to do it. So I think I'm a big advocate of just keep showing up and doing the things that you're interested in, and you never know, yeah, even if it makes a difference to one person's life, right? Yes.
Sorry, by the way, I'm being really rude. Because the guys in my garden.
We're out of time.
I know. The guys in my garden, because I've had to lock the door to keep the dogs in, they just sent me a message saying, hey, Stan, any chance for another cup of tea? So I do apologise. Thank you, Sally. Thank you for...
It's lovely to see you.
Thank you for being my friend for the last 30 years. It's been lovely to meet up with you again. But yeah, so yeah, thank you for having me. It's been lovely it's been really nice to talk to you. So yeah, let's have to do it again sometime.
Let's do it. Lots of love.
Mwah. See you later.
Bye.